And she was like astounded, like, that's Ernie. What's he doing walking by the window?
Unlocking the Soul, a podcast hosted by Rob Cimperman and produced by Simplify Films.
Topic 63, Post-Death Spirit Visits. Surveys show that about 20% of American people report having personally interacted with what they consider a ghost, a disincarnate spiritual presence of some sort. And 40% of people believe in ghosts. Now let that sink in for a moment. In your immediate family, if that includes 2 parents, a couple of siblings, perhaps a spouse, and a couple of children, chances are at least one of them has or will see a ghost. But it also means that most likely you don't believe in them. Let's see if we can help change that accounting today. I challenge you to question your own family, including extended family, about their paranormal experiences. I basically tried just that. Now, I've already reported about an interview with my son and his sighting of a ghost on 2 occasions in a friend's basement that had multiple witnesses in episode 23. But I immediately found 4 more fascinating post-death visit stories, or having a loved one appear immediately upon dying. And some were stories I'd never heard before. So what's going on? What's the spiritualism theory here, and why aren't we normalizing this widespread phenomenon? There are really 3 mechanisms that could be at play when a departing soul visits others during the paramortem period that I'll walk through. But first, consider this typical anecdote from my relative who was 18 when her grandfather was in a nursing home, which she still recalls very vividly. She went to visit him at a time when the whole family knew he probably only had a few days left to live. He couldn't speak or swallow at that point, so she said her goodbyes and asked her father to give her a call whenever he passed if she wasn't there. A couple of days later, she was asleep in her bed, her mother in the next room. She was sleeping on her right side and remembers waking up with that feeling you get when someone's standing over you or behind you, when you just kind of know that you're being watched. She opened her eyes and looked to her left across her body, where that feeling was coming from. There was in fact somebody standing there, but it wasn't a real person, not as she was used to seeing anyway. She didn't feel scared, like an intruder would have caused, but rather startled, like when a family member comes in and wakes you up unexpectedly. And being a father, I can relate to that feeling when you notice your toddler is standing 6 inches from your nose in the middle of the night. Startled, but not scared. But looking closer, she saw this was a shadowy figure standing to the left of her bed, toward the foot. Now, she didn't have her glasses on, so she felt she couldn't see in detail what she was looking at in the dark room. Now, in hindsight, it's not clear whether it was nearsightedness or the figure itself that was a bit blurry. But she could clearly tell that there was a man standing there. He was wearing a uniform of some sort, though she wasn't quite sure what type of uniform it was. He was young and had a hat on, and it was very shadowy over his eyes, preventing her from getting a good look at his face. She was so startled that she sat up in bed and didn't know what else to do because there was no light near enough that she could reach from her current position. So the next idea that came to her mind was to twist the wand on her Venetian blinds to let some additional light in. So she did so, letting in more light, but when she looked back, the man was gone. Analyzing what had just happened, she was sure that she was awake, not dreaming. She clearly remembered waking up just that once, opening her eyes, and obviously the blinds that she'd opened during the experience were still opened. She was looking at the clock and she put her glasses on and remembered thinking that she should remember the time in case it's significant. It was just after 3:30 in the morning. Her mother was sleeping in the same house, but she didn't feel the need to wake her at that time since it wasn't an intruder or anything dangerous. And in fact, she still wasn't scared at that point. She eventually fell back asleep. In the morning, she was expecting a phone call telling her that her grandfather passed during the night. When that call didn't come, doubts crept in as she went about her day and went to school. But what had she witnessed? But then the call finally came from her father that her grandfather had passed. She asked what time, which probably sounded like an odd question, but he relayed that the nurse only mentioned that it happened early morning, probably 1 or 2 a.m. She explained her visitation experience to her father and then to her grandmother, who both believed her interpretation of what she had seen and felt comfort in it. But that hadn't fully solved the mystery. Why hadn't he looked like she remembered to him? Well, a couple days later at the funeral, she saw a display with photos from her grandfather's life and family including some from when he was younger. And sure enough, there was one photo in particular of him wearing a Coast Guard uniform during World War II, and she thought, oh my gosh, that's what I saw. It was him as a younger man in his Coast Guard uniform, and it all made sense then. She never experienced anything like that before or since, and it was very real to her, even as she relived it a quarter century later. She only hopes sharing this experience will bring some peace and maybe even hope for anybody who wonders what happens to our souls after we die. And assuming it was what she thinks it was, it's evidence that our souls don't die with our body. Now, I love that story because there's zero question in my mind about its veracity. It also shows that upon leaving the body, we take on versions of ourselves that represent our body in its prime. So he was no longer an elderly man who couldn't speak or swallow, who would stare at the newspaper every day out of habit without actually reading it anymore. Instead, he was a strapping 20-something soldier in full uniform. But why was he there at all? Well, hold that thought. Here's another story that features a return to the body in its prime as a soul visits a loved one upon death. This one involves my wife's grandmother. She's still with us in her mid-90s, but not able to tell this story herself right now. However, she told me this story herself many years ago, so I have it firsthand. Here, I ask my mother-in-law to tell the story since she knows some additional background and details that I didn't have.
Oh, well, my father, who was injured when he was probably around 19 years old, was in a wheelchair, and but he invented various equipment so that he could be lifted into the car seat and use his upper body strength to turn the wheel. And so he was driving to work in 1969, and there was a big fog bank in Southern California on the coastal highway. And my mother sent me, I was far away, my mother sent me the account from the newspaper, a clipping, and apparently 106 cars were involved in that. And he was knocked out, and they found him hours later. My mother, of course, thought he was at work the whole time that this was all going on. And she looked up, and she says she saw him outside going past the window, walking, and she was like astounded, like, that's Ernie. What's he doing walking by the window? And then it wasn't too long after that, maybe a half hour or so, that she was notified that he had been found and deceased. And that really made a huge impact on her in her grieving.
And I think the way that she described it to me, that when the police knocked on the door,
She knew.
and she told them, "You're here about Ernie." And
Mhm.
they had no idea how she would have known that because they hadn't told her yet, and this was before cell phones and
Right.
instant communication.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, she felt that he was coming by to let her know that he was okay and he could walk again.
Wow, gives me chills. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. So before I give my last two stories, let's figure out what's going on here. So as I mentioned, there's three explanations I want to walk through. Explanation 1, thoughts suddenly being actualized. The most basic way that a post-death visit occurs is more or less by accident, or confusion if you will. This may not be a popular answer, but I believe it explains these basic scenarios. There's a wealth of detailed information about the dying process from the soul's perspective in the book The Complete Ascension Manual, How to Achieve Ascension in This Lifetime by Joshua David Stone, PhD. He explains, astral bodies travel with the mind. Very often, when soul extensions pass over like this, they will think of the family they have just left and will immediately be with a given family member. What they don't realize is that they are in a different dimension and their family members can't hear or see them. This can be quite confusing for people who have not realized that they have died. If you ever thought you were going to die, you may be able to relate to this. I personally thought I might drown once and noticed my thoughts being of my loved ones in that critical moment. What I believe is happening here is once a soul actually departs the physical body, their consciousness moves to the people that they would otherwise be only thinking about. They're able to create a thought form without effort at that point. It's probably not intentional to send a thought form to the person that they're thinking about. It's just the laws of physical reality just suddenly were shut off. They no longer restrict your mental abilities. This likely occurs during a short time after death as the soul comes to the conclusion that it's time to move on. I've talked about the greeting party of familiar souls that awaits you in the foyer or midplane of the spirit world. And I'm actually going to focus more on that in my next video about how to manage the 3-day Bardo period and merge with the light as quickly as possible. What we're talking about here could all be in the minutes or hours after death. Now, who can perceive such a thought form? Well, the spiritually sensitive, of course, and perhaps those with very strong connections to the sender. It seems that being a woman is a clear advantage with regards to perceiving visitors. You'll notice that all my stories today involve women. There's clearly a higher number of women widows in the world due to longer average lifespans of women than men, but that surely would not explain a granddaughter or a daughter among these visited in my stories. Plus, I have other stories for women in my family I wasn't even able to include here today. My next story is yet another example of this first explanation. It comes from my great aunt, who I remember well. She worked at a store near us where my brother and I would often go to spend our allowance money buying Star Wars action figures. Well, around that same time, in the 1980s, her husband had a brain tumor and needed brain surgery. My aunt was in the waiting room during the surgery, and remember several decades ago, we had far less effective surgical techniques than today, and not surprisingly, he didn't make it through the surgery. Now, nobody had informed my aunt of this yet in any way, but from the waiting room, she saw her husband's face, disembodied, floating down the hallway toward her. It then faded away. Soon after, she was notified of his death. Explanation number 2. Earthbound due to confusion or attachment. In what's probably the most understandable reaction, some souls panic upon death. They feel they have to get back to living, urgently even. This ties them to the place of their death rather than embracing the light and crossing over to the higher planes, where full memory and perceptions return. There are methods to mitigate this problem, particularly after a traumatic death. A soul may be put into a deep sleep and brought out gradually to help them understand what's happened without causing any harm. This is related to the place of healing and the energy showers, as well as simply receiving energy from our crossover greeters themselves. These are all ways to help wash a life's tarnished energy off of the soul and help them recall the full situation with clarity. The one source of immediate confusion comes from a fear that there's only one lifetime. If that lifetime has been a disappointing or painful life, then there's concerns it'll somehow color their experience after death. On this point, pioneering regression hypnotherapist Dolores Cannon adds pointedly, "Is it any harder to believe that you can be born once into a body than to believe that you can be born twice or more?" Or they may simply need to unlearn a distorted set of beliefs that they were raised with or acquired during life from religion, especially if they left their life with a negative karmic debt, or we might say lived a bad life, a life of harm, indulgence, or sin. Such people may cross the threshold with increasing fear of what the judgment awaits them. This may lead to a sort of reluctant perp walk rather than an eagerness to merge with the light. So earthbound spirits are in denial about being released, but due to their own unreleased attachments. They could love life or love someone or something so much that an attachment develops that they basically grieve their own death. The earthbound spirits could go about in a daze for a long time on Earth. They remain geographically in familiar areas. The subconscious may have been expecting much longer time to work out karma, and they may have been unable to understand what's going on, even feeling that they're owed more time. Some spirits linger longer, not wanting to give up the physical sensations of drugs or other addictions, trying to absorb the experience vicariously from others who still experience those sensations. Even if they realize they died, they are seeking to re-enter the living world until they eventually realize that they need to return to the spirit plane, pulled by its gradually increasing frequency attraction. Some souls are so trapped in a vicious cycle of their own earthbound energies and unprocessed emotions that they often don't perceive others or time or their true nature. This is related to the idea of poltergeists, or souls locked into the earth energy with such unprocessed emotion that they can manipulate objects that they focus their emotions on, whether to seek attention or revenge. These spirits, like all others, eventually calm down and decide that they're ready to move on, or get the help they need from experts at energy manipulation or cleansing to help them get back on their path. Explanation number 3, purposeful missions of comfort. Sometimes a soul either postpones their return to the spirit world or chooses to come back afterwards on a mission to comfort a loved one. This could be immediately upon death or after some time, but it takes actual skill, and this is a skill that some of us apparently haven't yet perfected. Regression hypnotherapist Dr. Michael Newton explores this idea in his books, describing how after death, loved ones are in a mental state of heightened agitation or complete numbness. Here's from a subject relating an interlife memory while under regression hypnosis, who describes his task as balancing the mind and body of a loved one. But when her energy is a tangled mess, he can be right next to her without her realizing it. He concludes that he would have better luck a couple days later, after the funeral. He says, "I've been incarnating and dying on Earth for thousands of years, and only in the last few centuries am I really getting the hang of how to alter negative thoughts and patterns and calm people." Dr. Newton then asks the question we're all wondering about a dawdling soul, whether his own spirit guide is impatiently waiting to escort him home, to move on from earthly attachments. He replies with a laugh, "I have informed my guide Eon that she would have to wait for me a while, which was unnecessary. She knows all about this. Eon was the one who taught me." So there seems to be a need for both proficiency and determination to reach the living soon after a death. Another subject soul walked Dr. Michael Newton through how he is able to get his wife to stop crying and to sense his presence. After that, he knows she'll be all right, and he has to get back to his pending responsibility. But when asked whether he'll leave her for good now, he retorts defensively, "Certainly not. I will remain in contact whenever she needs me. She is my love." Now, another method that some are more comfortable with is sending the living a sign. While disincarnate souls are obviously discouraged from offering too much evidence of the afterlife and spoiling the raison d'etre of this schoolhouse, we are all aware of stories of people getting signs from a departed loved one, a hint, or simply a reminder. Dr. Newton describes a soul who departed 3 weeks prior, building a two-way energy bridge with his living wife using an object with shared importance, a ring he used to wear. He was able to imbue energy onto it. She sensed it, and turning the ring in her hands, kissed the ring and said, "Thanks, darling. I know you're with me now. I'll try to be more brave." Another subject recounted seeing his widow mention her frustration as to why her husband hadn't reached out to her during a discussion with a group of friends. Right after she spoke the words, he responded by nudging a music box that hadn't been touched for 2 years to play the chimes to their song "In the Mood" at that exact moment, stunning her and her friends into silence. Another of Dr. Newton's cases involves a woman who used to give her husband neck massages during their life together. So she stops in occasionally to stimulate that part of his neck, knowing that he'll know it's her. She said she would be delighted if he finds another woman to love after her, but she can still come back if he yearns for her. Now, dreams are another avenue for visitation. They're not used very often. I've seen online posts from people distressed about why they haven't dreamed about a departed loved one. This shows us that there are myriad reasons, ranging from that not being an area of expertise for the departed soul, to just deciding that you didn't need such a visitation, or that wouldn't be appropriate. Dream communication is also unreliable and often dismissed upon waking, particularly due to the fading from memory if not written down. The part of the brain that retains the dream is the very same part used for short-term memory. You probably had half a dozen dreams last night, although you forgot most before you even woke up, with each dream erasing the previous. And then the next morning, as soon as sensory information floods into your brain as you start going about your day, it literally pushes the dreams out, unless you either wrote it down or it was so impactful that your brain threw it over the wall into the long-term memory storage portion of the brain. I'm sure right now you can recall at least a handful of such dreams from your life. Dr. Newton relates the story of a subject who died of pneumonia in 1935. She recalled that upon her death, she postponed her trip to the spirit world because she felt she must say goodbye to her mother, so she remained on Earth until her mother got news of her death. She inserted herself into her mother's dream by synchronizing with her mother's thought patterns and projecting an image of herself as her mother last saw her. She waved, smiled, hugged, and sent rejuvenating energy to her sleeping body, all to raise her mother's consciousness and ensure to have it be vivid enough that her mother would remember it upon waking. Again, that's a learned skill. Then she visited an old boyfriend she loved many years ago, but decided not to make a connection there. He was sound asleep, not in a dream stage, during which she might not pick up on a message anyway. She concluded that too many years had passed on Earth since they were close. He hardly thought of her anymore, so she left a trace of her energy with him. Then she moved on, knowing that they would reunite in the spirit world anyway. This is a busy time. A soul isn't only thinking about loved ones after death. I've mentioned how death begins a 3-day period called the Bardo. You can start to imagine how confusing this short period of time can be when you understand how many different types of activities are going on then. Dolores Cannon, in Between Death and Life, talks about how there are always a cadre of familiar souls ready to greet you upon death, as many souls face a period of disorientation. These are souls that we recognize from the most recent life, but then as memories begin returning, we also recognize them from their roles in previous lifetimes. During this Bardo time, a soul can also relive and review the most recent life, either sequentially, in reverse, or just select highlights. But in this case, you're seeing simulated images, glimpses of past events. This allows the soul to get a virtual redo if the soul made decisions it's disappointed with. It's like getting a chance to retake a school test after an unsatisfactory grade. This is described extensively by those who recall near-death experiences. On top of that, you're instantly being teleported to actual loved ones with whom your mind is wandering or is fixated upon, as in the stories I related at the beginning. And then layer on that reports of visions of expected religious or other imagery that's there to comfort you, or at least for those who need it. So it's no longer surprising that this could be a confusing time for a transitioning soul. It starts to seem like the best might just be to merge with the light immediately, doesn't it? Just move on efficiently. And that'll be the focus of my next video on the art and science of dying, with tips to support an efficient ascension process. But before I go, I do have another family story to tell. As far as I know, this is a rare occurrence, if not unique, and I don't quite know how to categorize this one. I knew only one of my great-grandmothers, but I knew her well. We visited her often. We saw her at holiday gatherings. She died in her 90s when I was in college, but I used to talk to her on the phone, and we even exchanged some letters during college when letters were still a thing. Here's a picture of her with a stylish 7th grade version of me. And this is the story of her mother, though, who died at my great-grandmother's house before I was born. It happened in the back bedroom, a room I remember. According to my great-grandmother, she was tending to her mother as she passed. Immediately after her mother died, she reports hearing church bells ringing in her house and loudly. And no, there's no church nearby or other obvious source, and this was before the day of ringtones or even computers. But it gets weirder. Then my great-grandmother heard a disincarnate woman's voice in her house in addition to the bells. It didn't sound like her mother's voice. It said, "Open the window and let her soul out." Not sure what else to do. Of course, she opened the windows. And as soon as she did, the bells faded away and the voice did not return. My great-grandmother always believed in angels after that. I was aware of her angel decorations as a child, but never knew why until recently. She would go on to decorate her house with them and to give them as gifts. I talked about how friends and guides from the spirit world assemble to help a soul cross over, and I suppose I assumed that would be directed at the soul itself. From this story, my only conclusion is that her guide, or as many mistakenly call them, guardian angel, actually asked her living daughter to assist the confused soul by opening the window. And one of the death facilitation tips is to play spiritual music during the time of passing. Perhaps the audible bells were a form of that, as if the spirit guide was extremely assertive in the assistance that she was providing, going above and beyond. Or perhaps my great-grandmother was very perceptive at the time. So I'll leave it at that, and be sure to watch for my next video that'll provide even more guidance on dying well. Thank you, my friends.